Okay, so we're going to call the meeting to order. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this meeting takes place in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. Before we move on to item 3, I'd just like to say if I get into a coughing jag here tonight, the deputy mayor is going to take over and I'm just going to step aside because that could happen at any time. And if you could turn off any kind of cellular device that you might have would help as well, because obviously even some of us up here don't remember how to turn them off at times. So that'd be great. So now we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Recommendation that council approve the agenda for March the 9th, 2024 as presented. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Mosier, seconded by Councillor Sanford. All those in favor?
Just one point of order. I believe you mean the April 9th meeting.
April 9th. Yeah, okay. I was just reading what was here. Okay. April 9th. Right on. Okay. And motion's carried. Approval of the minutes. The council approved the March 26, 24 meeting minutes as presented. Is there a mover? Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Birtles. Any questions or all those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, so now we're going to move on to public input and questions. I'll just go over the rules quickly. Each person is limited to 3 minutes. Please state your name. Questions or comments are directed through me. So basically everything has to go through me, not to an individual councillor or staff. Comments and questions are limited to today's agenda, which is quite big. So if it's on there, you can speak about it. And a couple other things, we will be enforcing the 3 minutes. So I'll ring my buzzer a couple of times and then I'll just hold the buzzer down. And the other thing is I'll ask for every presentation or any statement or presentation either by a councillor or by a citizen that let's just run the meetings with a bit of respect all the way around. So that means no clapping, cheering, booing, hissing. It's not a sporting event. It's a meeting. So if we could just keep it professional, that would be great. So we'll move on. And do we have anyone on the list? No. So after all that, we have no one on the list. So I will try to do what I just said. Okay, so now we'll move on to number 6, presentations. There is none. So we'll move on to number 7, which is correspondence. And under correspondence, we have a few things in front of us. There is a recommendation there, 7.1, proclamation request for Heart Failure Awareness Week, Heart and Stroke Nova Scotia. There is a recommendation in front of us that council proclaim May 5th to 11th as Heart Failure Awareness Week in the Town of Luneburg. So is there a mover with that? Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor Sanford. All those in favor? Motion carried. Now, we do have a couple public hearing information things on our agenda here under number 8. They're based pretty simple, but I will go over the rules again that's in front of you on the agenda. Staff will start by providing an overview of the agenda item. Staff will answer questions from council. The meeting will be open to the public for questions after that time. Each person is limited to 5 minutes. You must state their name. Questions and comments, once again, are directed through the chair, which is myself. And once the public hearing is closed, no further questions or comments on the matter may be received. So in stating all that, 8.1 is amendment bylaw to repeal certain bylaws, public hearing and second and final reading. So the recommendation is that council approve the second and final reading of the amendment bylaw to repeal certain bylaws as presented. So that's a recommendation. Is there a mover? There's a mover by Councillor Duggan. Is there seconded by the Deputy Mayor? Is there any questions or discussion on that motion? If there isn't any around the table, is there any questions or discussions from the gallery? If there isn't any, then I'll basically deem the hearing closed and we'll call for the motion. So all those in favor of the recommendation? Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. And now 8.2 is an amendment to public places bylaw public hearing. So this is a public hearing. So we will get staff to provide a brief overview of the agenda item and then we'll go from there. Is that Kayla? Or okay.
All right, thank you so much. So during our second public hearing of this evening, we welcome anyone to comment or ask questions about the proposed amendment to the public places bylaw. This proposed amendment primarily seeks to remove any reference to special events within the bylaw as later in tonight's meeting, staff are recommending that council approve a new special events policy, which would remove the need for special events to be regulated through the public places bylaw. Council gave first reading to the amended bylaw at its March 12th meeting. Since then, staff have not received any comments on this proposed amendment. Should council agree with staff's recommendation, it is recommended that staff approve the second and final reading of the amended bylaw following the approval of the proposed special events policy, which is scheduled immediately after this agenda item. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Are there any questions from council? Are there any questions from the gallery or any presentations? Okay, so having no questions, I guess we just move on. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Now, 9.1 is business arising and unfinished business. So recommendation number 1, that council approve the special events policy as presented. So is there someone willing to move that? Moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Is there any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor of the recommendation? All those opposed? Motion carried. Recommendation number 2, that council repeal the annual town parade approval procedure policy. That is a recommendation. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Councillor Bertle, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any discussion, questions on the motion or recommendation? Seeing none. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried. And recommendation number 3, that council approve the second and final reading of the amended public places bylaw, bylaw number 55 as presented. That's been recommendation. Is there a recommendation? Moved by Councillor Moser, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Any questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried. Okay. So now we'll move on to 9.2, which is the Blockhouse Hill design project, design option 1.2 hybrid. It's basically an information report at this time. Does anyone have anything to discuss or on that at this time? Councillor Moser.
Thank you, Worship. Well, my issue with the report is that it's framed around option 1.2. And aside from that, staff keeps recommending option 2, when based on the January 23rd motion, it wasn't even mentioned. Option 2, we were given, staff's given 2 options, either to explain, I'll read the motion. It says council directs staff to work with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects Limited on drafting development rules based on design option 1, Town Square, with the possible road connecting of Creighton Street and Sawpit Road, which that's created the option 1.2. So I'd like to have the debate on, you know, whether we choose option 1.2 or option 1, and then to have well, I guess with council's permission, I'll say I'd make a motion to this effect. I'll make a motion that I'd like to decide on option 1 or option 1.2 for Blockhouse Hill development based on McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects Limited design, and have them draft the development rules based on the option chosen, and then have the chosen lands within that option declared as surplus and no longer required for town purposes.
Okay, there's a motion on the table. Before we talk about the motion, is there a seconder on the motion? Is there a seconder of the motion on the table? Second time. For a third time, is there a seconder on the motion? There's a seconder. Councillor Duggan seconds the motion. Now we can discuss the motion. So Councillor Halverson.
I appreciate what Councillor Moser is trying to get at here, but my impression when we went for 1.2 is that we hadn't decided that that's the way we were going to go. That's the option we want some costing on, and that the other 2 options were still on the table, that we weren't, you know, we hadn't eliminated those as options. So, you know, and especially where what we're hearing is that option 2 is favorable. I think it's prudent to get that information from 1.2. That's why I seconded his motion at that meeting. But I don't think this is the time yet to take all those options off the table.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Councillor Sanford.
I'd like to add option 2, if we could, to our discussion. And I go back to my thinking was when we added option 1.2, it was to provide a full picture of the potential of what the maximum of what could possibly happen should option 1.2 be decided on. My understanding is we were waiting for information on that, and we were also looking at the information in the context of the taxes, which Mayor Myra had requested in that same meeting. So I believe that we have all our information at this point. I'm thinking initially we came to that January 20, was it the 24th meeting? Prepared to vote on options, and if we were, we had a motion at that time, and we also had a motion to make the land surplus to start the public information meetings. But with the request of the additional information that we've now received and reviewed in the context of option 1.2 and the tax information, I think that if we discuss option 1, option 1.2, option 2, that we are prepared to make a recommendation to Councillor Mosier's point, to be able to move forward with development rules, direction in whatever the option is that's determined, and also to declare the lands surplus. So I would also like to include option 2. Number 1, it was identified by the community in the workshops. Number 2, it's been identified by staff. And I think to Councillor Mosier's point in an earlier discussion regarding street naming, I think Councillor Mosier, you had said that if we go out to the community and ask them for their input, we go with what they say. And my understanding is they wanted option 2. So that would be my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Mosier.
Well, I'm happy to amend the motion to include option 2 if we want to have the fuller discussion on that. So I'll move that we amend the motion to include option 2.
So the motion's been amended. Is that okay with the seconder? Okay, it's okay with the seconder. So it's options 1, 2, and 1.2. Okay, so any other discussion on those 3 options? Kayla.
Sorry, just to interject. I'm wondering if you could repeat that motion for the record, and also it would be a good time to point out that at that January 23rd meeting, council already did make a motion to bring back development rules for a modified option 1, which is the information that we're presenting this evening. So that is already an approved motion that staff are to work with Brian McKay-Lyons to create development rules for a modified option 1, which is now being called option 1.2.
Just could I have a question then through to Kayla? Well, would we need new options or new development rules for if it's a different option that we choose? That's why I included that in, so that way we'd have that all covered. Or is that already, are those option rules no matter what, option we take?
Through the chair, Councillor Mosher. So as Kayla had pointed out, we've already voted on development rules for option 1.2. Part of the reason to bring the report back was for staff to compile some more information based on taxes and costing and things like that. Perhaps what we should do now is Hillary provide a presentation of the information that we found. And if that is enough to change your mind, then of course we could change which option we're going with. And that was the whole point of this new report, say, hey, we found out all this and other information about taxes and things like that. Do you still want to move forward with development options for 1.2? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so any further discussion at this point? Councillor Halverson.
So I guess I'm waiting. Are we going to get the presentation from from Hillary before we? Yes, okay, just making sure.
Yep.
As frankly, I wasn't expecting to see a motion on the floor tonight, but this was supposed to be an information report.
Yeah, quite honestly, before Hillary presents, I'm not prepared at this point. I'd be prepared to move or vote on one of the options, but until we know some of the more detailed rules, like for example, there's no off-site parking for a lot of the rules. That has to be talked about down the road. So until we know how many off-site parking spots there's going to be, we don't know how many acres we need to put up for for surplus land, for example. So I don't think we're at that point yet. But I'd like to hear from Hillary and find out which direction we're going to send them back to come back with, whether it's option 2 or 1.2 or 1, and say, this is how many offsite parking spots we need. This is how many acres we need, because we're certainly not to that point in this report at this point from what I read. So, okay. So Hillary, you're up.
Good evening. So for the record, I am Hillary Grant, Director of Community Development, though I think you all know me. It's my pleasure to bring forward an update on the Blockhouse Hill design project. Staff calculated the potential tax revenue from each design option, though these estimates are based on several assumptions. So it's very important to note that while Town Council sets the town's tax rates, the town doesn't assess properties. Assessments are done by the Property Valuation Services Corporation. These numbers work from the assumption that any buildings on Blockhouse Hill will be assessed at a minimum at what it costs to build them, and that all costs to build them will be carried by the developer. These numbers are far from guarantees and should not be read as such, but they do demonstrate a widely accepted correlation between density and tax revenue, where more density results in more tax revenue. I'm pleased to inform you that on March 27th, the Government of Nova Scotia approved the Archaeological Resource Impact Assessment conducted by Davis, McIntyre and Associates. The archaeologist granted me permission to share from this confidential report that her work included Mi'kmaq engagement. Staff have confirmed for Parks Canada that the Mi'kmaq have been consulted and that staff's heritage impact assessment work is iterative and ongoing. On that note, I do have an important update from Parks Canada not included in the memo. On Friday, April 5th, the Executive Director of Cultural Heritage confirmed that in the World Heritage context, buffer zones are intended to provide additional protection to property through complementary legal mechanism placed on their development and use. They also confirmed that it is the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value that encapsulates the World Heritage Committee's decision and approval of what elements of the property are of outstanding universal value and hence must be protected. The Executive Director of Cultural Heritage highlighted that Old Town Luneburg's Statement of Outstanding Universal Value says that Old Town Luneburg World Heritage Site's boundaries adequately ensure the complete representation of the features and processes that convey the property's significance. Therefore, according to the decisions of the World Heritage Committee, there is nothing in the buffer zone that contributes to the site's global significance. The role of the buffer zone in the case of Old Town Luneburg is to allow the site manager to influence what occurs within this zone to mitigate potential impacts on the World Heritage Site proper. This does not mean, of course, that the town as caretaker of Old Town Luneburg should not take Old Town's significance into account when considering development. Far from it. But it does mean the question is not whether Blockhouse needs to be conserved in perpetuity as green space to ensure Old Town's continued World Heritage listing. Rather, the question is, if council chooses to build, what should be built, where, and what mitigation measures should be taken to minimize detraction from and maximize benefit for Old Town Luneburg. For example, views from Sylvia Park were important to workshop attendees. And while a heritage plan and bylaw cannot and has never been able to prohibit any development on a lot, this is stated in Section 19D of the Provincial Heritage Property Act, The division between urban and non-urban lands and the view from Blockhouse Hill is a character-defining element under the town's Old Town Luneburg Heritage Conservation District Plan and bylaw. Thus, staff recommend council consider this in their design selection and their evaluation of this new information, and whether mitigation measures should be taken to preserve this division. Digging even deeper, concerns have been expressed by members of the public regarding the new land use bylaw and its implications for Blockhouse Hill. A map that forms part of Attachment C, but is mislabeled as Attachment G, my apologies for that, highlights the area of Blockhouse Hill that was rezoned for residential development under the new land use bylaw. A table in Attachment C compares residential zoning today to the 1996 land use bylaw, revealing that they are very similar. While it is extremely hard to geolocate old maps exactly, it appears options 2 and 3 could have been approved as of right under the 1996 bylaw, with the possible exception of 2 or 3 homes at the Creighton Street connection in option 2. Of course, all of this design analysis must be balanced with potential social and economic benefits of increasing Lunenburg's housing stock for Old Town and the community as a whole. It is crucial to its World Heritage status that Lunenburg remain a viable living town, and the housing crisis is a pressing public issue. Furthermore, as already mentioned, there is a positive correlation between density and tax revenue. The town has substantial financial needs, including an impressive historic building portfolio and an internationally renowned street grid in need of repair. Staff again recommend design option 2 because it balances housing and heritage and other public concerns, such as keeping green space, recognizing, of course, that council has directed us to work on development rules for design option 1.2, and that work is ongoing. Option 2 also maximizes density while providing flexibility for mitigation measures such as green screening or moving a few homes from the southern side of the Creighton Street extension, and it felt pertinent to bring this and new information from Parks Canada to council this evening. Staff will continue this type of assessment work and update Parks Canada regularly while McKay Line Sweet Apple prepares development rules for whatever design option council feels is in the best interest of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. So hearing Hillary's report, basically, I guess where we are right now, we have a motion on the table. You'd like Councillor Moser to reread his motion?
It's just suggested if Councillor Moser no longer wants to pursue that motion that has been seconded, it should be withdrawn from the floor.
No, I wish to pursue it.
All right, in that case, can you please reread your motion?
The motion is to decide on options 1, 1.2, or 2 for Blockhouse Hill development used by McKay Line Sweet Applegate, based on McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects Limited design. Now, I'm assuming that we have to draft up the rules regardless, so that's why I had that in there. So then I have and work with drafting development rules based on the design option chosen with McKay Lyons. I guess that's who we're doing with. Yeah, okay. And that whatever option that we choose, those lands to have those lands declared as surplus and no longer required for town purposes.
Perhaps this is a better question to Hillary, and the contract as it currently exists with McKay Lyons is, I believe, under the current scope, it's just development rules for one design option. So just for clarity, are you looking for development rules on 3 different designs?
No, we're choosing an option tonight, and that's the one that we'll go with.
Okay.
Yeah, so if I'm reading this right, we're going to discuss this, choose an option tonight, and then send it back to staff to come back with development rules and, tell us at a future meeting, like how many acres that option needs based on the development rules we want put in place. And at that point, then we move forward. Is that the way I'm understanding it? Yeah, that's.
Well, basically, I think, but otherwise, I mean, it's set. I mean, whatever we choose, that's the option. And of course, staff will come back with the rules and the land that we need to declare as surplus, because we don't really know that until you have all those details worked out.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, so what we're gonna do is we're finally gonna send them back. Rather than 1.2, 2, 3, 4, whatever else, we're gonna pick one of those options tonight, and that's what we're living with. And then when they come back with the development rules, we're gonna discuss those further and then make that decision, however much land needs to be surplus, we'll do it at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
that's right. Before we move further, we're still going to need to amend the original motion of January 23rd, because that motion directs us to work for development options at 1.2. This new motion, if I understand it correctly, it almost should be two parts, one of which you want to choose option 1, 1.2, or 2, and then direct us to move forward to work development options on one of those options. As Kayla mentioned, our contract only states to do one option of development rules. So if you pick one of those three, then we amend the original motion of the 23rd of January to suggest something other than 1.2, if it is something other than 1.2, if you know what I mean.
Well, the motion of the 23rd has one and or an option of extending the road. So when we initially did that, I thought we were gonna, basically was that option of 1, and then perhaps once we looked at option 1.2, I was hoping staff would come back and say, of 1 or 1.2, we like maybe which one they like the best, which they come back with option 2. So anyway, that to me wasn't even relevant to the original option. So after our discussion tonight, and we wanted to make this motion, then it's just, we added in option 2 because otherwise we were probably not going to get anywhere. So I just wanted to bring this to a conclusion of some sort.
So, and I appreciate some of the clarity. Perhaps, Mr. Mayor, we could take a 5-minute recess, make sure we all have it clear, and then come back into session with a good, clean motion that gives us some direction. And we would also, just so you all know, if you decide to make a decision and pick a motion or pick an option, you're also going to have to do a waiver of the notice of motion today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
okay, so we're gonna have a 5-minute recess. So we're gonna come back out of recess. Michael, are we good? Okay, excellent. So we're out of recess, and I'm gonna ask CEO Jamie Doyle to take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the indulgence, everyone. After going back and having a conversation, what's before council now is based on the new information we've just given you through this report. Council needs to choose whether they're going with option 1 or the hybrid option of 1.2. That's what we're voting on. And should that pass, great. If not, it dies on the floor. So that's what we're reconfirming. If you still want to move forward with option 1 or 1.2, and that was the direction given on the 23rd to look into one of those two. So 2 is technically off the table, 3 and 4.
Okay, so if that dies tonight, 1 or 1.2, then there can be another motion made at that point.
Yes, there could be another motion. However, if you want to make a decision on it, you also need to waive the notice of motion period.
Okay, so to start, we're gonna debate and discuss 1 and 1.2 first, right?
Just be clear, is there a motion on the floor right now? Is that what we're?
It's the original motion of the 23rd. So where it's the original motion back to January, we had discussed 1 and 1.2. That's why number 2 wasn't on the table. So we have to discuss 1 and 1.2 at this point. And depending on how that discussion and vote goes, then another motion can be made after that. But we have to do some other things before that. So in stating that, if someone wants to start the discussion off on 1 or 1.2, who would like to go?
Would you like me to read out the original motion?
Sure, you go ahead first.
The original motion made by Council Mosher, seconded by Councillor Halverson, that council direct staff to work with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects Limited on drafting development rules based on design option 1, Town Square with possible road connection of Creighton Street and Saw Pit Road, which now is option 1.2. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So hearing the motion as read a couple months ago, who would like to start the discussion? Councillor Mosher.
Thank you, Worship. So, yeah, and this is where we originally came to the point where I thought we had decided on option 1, and then a hybrid option was thrown in for that particular option. So anyway, I'm still, I like to support the full option 1. The reason I like that option is it's sort of, it keeps those lower lands a little more open, and it protects the trail a little, shelters the trail a little more with vegetation. I think that the view planes in McKay Lyons design respects the sight line more than wild vegetation that exists there now. So when we talk about, you know, not going into like, not moving up that extra level because of sight lines, I think you actually will get a better sight line and a more respected sight line to the water with the development there. And the other thing I reference when staff references the bylaws of 1996, I would ask, why do we reference old bylaws when we have to follow the bylaws that we have currently? So, so I think we get more benefit from that original full core option 1 from McKay Lyons.
Okay, any other? Councillor Halverson.
That was you dinging or so? Okay. I originally supported this motion because I wanted some extra information. I like the idea of gathering as much information as we can to make the decision. When I start looking now, I respect what Councillor Mosher says about the view planes and the trail access. But when I'm looking at attachment B, the options comparison chart, you know, costs, I'm not worried about the cost. Those are meant to be borne by the developer. So I'm going to leave those out of the conversation at this point. What does concern me, though, is when I start looking at the tax revenue that's estimated. You know, I look at option 1, 2.5 million, option 1.2 is 2.5 and change, and 1.75 for option 2. And I compare that against the cost of the upgrades required for the plant. It's significantly more. You know, 16 million, 17 million for option 1 or 1.2, 8 million for option 2. And we're getting 1.76 million projected. Again, I understand these are rough estimates. I'm not imagining these are actual numbers, but best guesses with the information we have in this time. So, but at 1.766 to support upgrades of $8 million or $2.5 million to support upgrades of $60 million, that's a longer time to try and pay that plant off, right? Those I am also assuming, maybe I could ask Hillary or CAO to clarify this, but this estimated municipal tax revenue, that's once this development is complete, we'll be realizing this annual return. Right, okay. So while this is being built, we have to build a wastewater treatment plant to provide access to these structures while they're being built. If these structures don't get built out till 10, 15, 20 years, that's a long time to carry those costs at a reduced income. So there's those reasons. Like financially, I don't see it. I also like the fact that the archaeological impact, there's no impact with option 2. We'd have to do some mitigation for options 1 or 1.2. And what we've heard from the community that they did prefer option 2. I also we keep hearing from staff, it comes back as a recommendation. Option 2 is overwhelmingly what they choose. So for me, I cannot support in good conscience option 1, 1.2. I'm content to move away from that and look towards a different option at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Halverson. Anyone else at this time? Councillor Bertels.
Thank you. I do agree with both Councillor Mosier and Councillor Haverson's points. I always did like option two. So I would still be in favor of option two. I do agree with having the road in, like Councillor Mosier said, we do need to have access, but to me, option two does look like the better one.
Thank you, Councillor Bertels. Anybody else? Okay, if there's no other discussion on this motion at this time, I'll call a question on the motion. Okay, Councillor Mosier.
Well, your worship, I think we're debating 1 and 1.2. We're not, so which one are we voting on?
It would be-
I'm voting on that we support option 1.
The motion, I think, says both, so that we have to clarify before we vote for number one, or unless we're throwing them in together.
So the original motion, Mr. Mayor, it says design option 1, town square with possible road connection of Creighton Street and Saw Pit. So the addition of the road connection created option 1.2. So my advice would be, if you're going to work with option 1, I think if you're adding option 1.2, and Caleb can correct me from a legislative perspective, I would like to see that a waiver of notice of motion and of a motion of 1.2 be created. I think to be clean, if that's where we're going, if we're not picking option 1, then, or 1.2, then I think it dies on the floor.
So we're voting on 1 right now.
1 or 1.2. So that's the way the motion reads. You could vote on either one of them.
Okay.
But
Councillor
I don't think
Halverson.
it doesn't sound like it's either or from what you're saying. It's, we can vote for 1, we can vote for 1.2, or we can vote to not vote for either of those. Is
That's
that right?
correct. You could leave that die on the floor, but if you wanted to go
Yes.
to vote option 2 or could bring forward option 2, you would need to then waive the notice of
Right.
motion and bring forward option 2.
Okay.
Yes, so we can't, it can die on the floor. It's been moved and seconded though, this motion has it not?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
So then we'll, for a motion. Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm totally, because what do I call for a motion on?
This, if I could, what we're talking about now is very different from what I think Councillor Mosher started out with. I would ask, it might be easier for all of this, perhaps if Councillor Mosher was willing to withdraw that motion, we put forward clean motions that we can vote on, so we're all very clear on what it is that we're looking for.
Councillor Mosier.
Well, again, and this is with our discussion back there, it's option 2 was dead when we voted this motion back in January. So really, we were voting on option 1 was the vote we took, although we threw in an option of the extended road. So that's what I thought we were originally going to be voting on here tonight. So I don't know how we can go back when on the 28th, we voted for option 1 with the option of a extended road, which that's the report we wanted back from staff. And we got some of that, and we got information on the taxes and some of those things that we needed for to choose between option 1 or 1.2.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, Councilor Mosher is correct. So option 1 was chosen, and option 2, 3, and 4 were not. The addition to option 1 was go check and see if we can do this connection between Creighton Street and Saw Pit Road. So what the report is saying, we've done that work. Here's option 1.2 that we called it. Do you want to move forward with 1.2 as presented, or option 1? So that's what you're voting on. That's how I would interpret it. If I'm wrong, stand to be corrected.
Okay, but I understand all that. That I get. But if we don't want to go with either, then how do we let that motion die on the floor and then do the next phase, because I don't think we're gonna get a majority to vote for either one of those two options unless I'm not reading the room at all. So how do we get to the next stage? Do we just let that motion die, or don't we have to vote?
It could just die if it's not voted on. Like, Kayla can correct me if I'm wrong.
So Councillor Mosier did make a motion earlier in this meeting, which has now gone a little bit further from what your intent is, as I'm interpreting it now. That motion was seconded, and I apologize. I do believe it was Councillor Bertles who seconded that motion. Duggan. So that motion as it was should be withdrawn because I no longer think that that's your intent. Now, what we've been talking about a little bit is the way that perhaps staff has interpreted the original motion from January 23rd is that option 1 with the connection of these roads is essentially now option 1.2. So as it's being interpreted, January 23rd, though we didn't have the words for it then, is option 1.2. And with all the information that is being presented here tonight, I believe the question, and maybe this is further to what Councillor Mosier's intent is, should council, based on the information that is now being presented here tonight, want to still continue with option 1.2, we could reconfirm that motion. If, based on the information that is presented here tonight, if council is no longer comfortable with pursuing development rules for option 1.2, we could go back and amend that motion. So it could be option 1 or it could be option 2. And that is something that we could vote on. If we were not reconfirming the motion of January 23rd, which again, staff's interpretation, I think for the most part, is that is now option 1.2, then we would require a waiver of notice to make any other new motions here tonight. Happy to answer any more questions.
Okay, so are we willing to let the motion from January 23rd? Are we voting on that, or are we just moving forward, or I'm still totally, how do we get to the waiving? Yes,
I think at this point, to Kayla's point, we should be withdrawing the first motion that was tabled, because it's not the same motion at this point. And then we can proceed with new motions.
Councillor Moser, do you want to withdraw your original motion of tonight, which was 1.2, and 2?
Not really, no, because honestly, we had the debate between option 1 and 2 back in January. And this is my point in it, that we made the decision then for option 1. And then the hybrid was thrown in. And so when that came back to council, I'm assuming that was the decision we'd be making between 1 and 1.2, not the other ones were already discarded from the original motion.
Okay, so I think I might have made an error then myself on January 23rd, because I supported the motion, because I think we voted unanimous at that meeting. But I thought we were asking for more information to come back to the table before we made a decision on any option. That's how I assume we were proceeding. So I know for myself personally, you know, contrary to what other people around this table might think, I was actually leaning more towards 2 or a hybrid of 2 and 3, right? So, but I could live with 2, right? So I know I probably wouldn't have supported that motion the way I did if I knew that that was like sort of the deciding vote at that time. So I guess hearing what I'm hearing around the table, I don't think the majority want to go with 1 or 1.2. So I guess the instructions I'm looking for or advice is how we get away from that motion and put a new motion on the table to send staff back for number 2. Councillor Mosier.
I don't know if I can do this, but I would table the motion and till we find out really what we can and cannot do with that. Because I mean, it was a motion that was voted on and accepted by council. So I'd like to see that whether that motion, you know, can be changed, can be modified, or it has to stand and we are voting on option 1 or 1.2. So is that a possibility to table the motion to the next meeting so we can find out procedurally how we deal with this?
Yeah, I would suggest council can table a motion or refer it to the next meeting and just direct staff to prepare another report that perhaps massages out some of the nuances of these recommendations.
Councillor Halverson.
But I mean, if I'm not mistaken, again, I just reading the tenor of the room here, I was of the same impression you were, Mayor Meyer, with that we were getting some more information with 1.2 was the intent of 1.2. Well, we've got more information now. I mean, we could make a motion to well, how would we affect the past motion? We would amend the motion. We would table, we would do notice, we waive notice of motion. We would, and then would say, okay, we don't want to do the motion we had January 23rd. And then we make a fresh motion today. Is that based on to vote for 1.2 or 2?
Well, if I'm corrected, maybe I'm not, because I'm like, I'm just guessing, but according to what Kayla said, like staff is taking option 1 and turning it into 1.2 with this report. So can we not vote on option 1.2 at this point? If that motion gets defeated, then we can go on and bring option 2 onto the table after we waive the notice of motion requirements. So if that's the case, then I'd call a question on the motion, then we'd vote on option 1.2, because 1 in essence turned into 1.2 after that motion. That's the way I'm understanding, Kayla, but again, it's what is clear as mud. So from everybody right now, because we're all sort of new. So why don't we just call for a motion on option 1.2 and let's see where the ball falls. So
That's great. But we still have a motion on the floor that we have to. We still have.
we can't vote on the original motion because the original motion that we made tonight was probably out of order with the motion that was made on January 23rd. So or 26th or whatever. So we should probably withdraw that motion because it probably shouldn't have been made in the first place. Okay. And then we'll vote on the January 23rd meeting at this point. If that's okay with everybody. Kayla seems to think that's what we should do.
I agree that the original motion that was put to the floor and seconded on contradicts, because it is asking to decide on option 1, 1.2, or 2. So it contradicts our January 23rd motion where we've had direction to consider development rules for a modified option 1. So really the intent is if you would like to confirm the modified option 1, which is now option 1.2, or if council tonight would like to make a waiver of notice to amend the January 23rd motion, insert new design option, whether that's 1 or 2.
It's probably easier to defeat or pass option 1.2. And if it gets defeated, then move forward with a new motion after we waive the notice of motion rules, would it not be?
Yes.
Okay. So Councillor Mosher.
Well, I do agree that the original motion put on the floor tonight is probably out of order based on the motion of the 26th. The problem is the interpretation of the motion from the 23rd. So I made the motion. I should know how it was interpreted. So I interpreted it as we decided on option 1 and we were willing to look at a hybrid of that option and then decide which one we liked the better out of the 2. So I still see the other options outside of option 1 or option 1.2 as being already, eliminated.
Okay, I think though, because we haven't made a final decision, I think if this motion gets defeated, I think at any time we as council can bring an option back on the table and make a motion because we didn't really eliminate those options at that time. That's how I see it. But again, like I said, this is way above what I thought I'd be doing here tonight. So let's call for the vote on the original motion on January 23rd, which we're voting on option 1.2, right? The hybrid motion, because that's now the new one. So all those in favor of proceeding with 1.2? Okay, go ahead. It's out of order, so we should have probably never allowed it. So if it was out of order, can it not just be removed?
I would suggest, just for clarity, if Councillor Mosier would, to please withdraw that original motion.
The motion for tonight's motion,
Yeah.
yeah?
The
Yeah,
motion.
I will withdraw the motion of tonight, yes, because
Yeah.
we're really dealing with the motion of the 23rd. And I still think that we need some procedural interpretation of that motion before we vote on it. Because again, I can understand why it was misinterpreted, but I can't understand why we would vote on a misinterpreted result.
Through the chair to the mayor. So when I'm rereading the original motion that made by Councilor Mosher, I agree with his interpretation of that. What I read the motion and what I understood was that option one was chosen, but staff to look at it at a hybrid of that we now deem 1.2 to see if we could connect Creighton and Saw Pit Road. And this report would say, this is what happens when you do that. So do you want to move forward with that 1.2 or the connections there, or do you want to reaffirm option one as the choice? That's what I interpret that original motion to be. So the decision would be, do you want to move forward with option one or 1.2 with the information we've now given you? If nothing, then we'd have to do the waiver of motion and go through that. I would suggest that we defer to the next council meeting, clean up the motion and report to only have those two options in it, and you can either vote on that to adopt it or defeat it. But that's completely up to council.
Councillor Sanford.
I would prefer that we work through this tonight, please.
Not a problem. I just need as much direction as possible. I was home for a week sleeping, so I'm all set for tonight. So, so we want to vote now on either option one or 1.2. And if they both, but if we don't want either one, then what do we do? I guess that's where I'm totally confused. How do we
Well,
kill that original motion?
Sorry, is it possible to make two motions? To have a vote on option one, then proceed with a vote on option 1.2, and then if, depending how those go, then allow motions from the floor. Is that a possibility?
Through the chair to the deputy mayor, the way I read it, you've already made your choice, and your choice was option one, with the possibility of looking at a 1.2 or a hybrid of option one to connect Creighton Street and Saw Pit Road. That's the choice that you made. Now, unfortunately, I don't think you can go backwards and fix that. Like, I think that choice is already made, right? So that's from a legislative perspective. I don't know if Kayla has the policies in front of her, but that's what you need to figure out, option one or 1.2, because the rest are already off the table. That's how I interpret that, the same as Councillor Mosher.
But is there any way, I guess my question would be, is there any way to bring them back on the table if 1 or 1.2 isn't acceptable to this group? Because we're ultimately the ones making the decision. Councillor Mosier.
I'll suggest this. So we're getting all tied up in knots here over this. And I know, like, originally my argument for option one was that even if we didn't build to its full potential, you can build to option two, which exists right within option one, right? Then we started talking about this extended road, right? Which that threw us off. At the rate we're going, I wouldn't even expect to see a bulldozer up there for another 5 years. So, I mean, it's not going to be within our purview to decide what gets built there anyway. That was my original argument. Just put the full load on there and let the future councils decide, you know, to what extent they want to build it. They want to build in 1 street, 2 streets, 3 streets, 4 streets. At least they got the option to build all the streets if they wanted to build them. So, you know, this would just put everything in place, that all the tools in place that a future council would need to do the whole development, half the development, quarter the development, whatever they decide, right? But at least we're moving this part forward. And, otherwise, this council won't even achieve that goal. So that was my whole options for pushing hard for one. Kind of sorry now we even got that hybrid in there. So I'm still adamant that we got to vote in one or the other. So whether we do, it's kind of irrelevant because we're not going to see this, happen in our tenure. I can guarantee you that.
Councillor Halverson and then the CAO.
It might be more poignant if I speak before Councillor Hudson.
Okay, CAO.
You could amend that original motion, just so you know. So because it hasn't been acted on yet, you could go back and amend that original motion of the 23rd and add or delete.
Okay, Councillor Halverson.
And I respect everything that Councillor Mosier said there. I agree with, this is going to be long after none of us are sitting on council. I mean, I don't think I was three-term councillors like my friend next door to me here, but what I look at is what are we saving what are we saving future councils from? We've already borne the brunt of this. We've done the public consultation. We've done the meetings. We've made the presentations. We've got the feedback. This option 2 was what we heard that people wanted, right? So I think in good faith with the community and with the efforts that have been put forward, I really do feel like in good conscience, we need to go with number 2. And not to mention the economics that I'm seeing in front of me here, but also just to keep faith with the community.
Councillor Halverson, I don't disagree with you. I think we've said all along, we want to hear from the community, we want to hear what they had to say, and it was evident at the public sessions I attended. And from what we've seen in the reports, option 2 was more favorable than the other options, and staff obviously likes option 2. I don't think that's the big debate right now, though. I think the debate is, we're talking about 1 and 1.2, the way I understand it. So the motion, the person that made the motion on the 23rd was Councillor Mosier, and the seconder was Councillor Halverson. So in order to amend that motion, do you not need anyone? So is anyone willing to amend that motion to add option 2 to it, or to add option 2 to that motion? According to the CEO, we can amend it to add an option to that motion because it hasn't been acted upon yet. So if that's allowed, is anybody, go ahead, Councillor Halverson.
Just want to be clear. So the motion what we're amending is we want either the 1.2 or 2, or are we amending to put both for it? Because I understand that the contractors are only going to act on one recommendation.
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson. So what I don't want to do is get into the same knots we're currently in. So if you're going to amend the original motion, which is that we direct staff to work with Kayline and Sweet Apple Architects on drafting development rules based on design option 1, Town Square, with possible road connection to Creighton Street and South Pit Road, be a bit more concise and pick an option and then vote on it. So whether it's 1, 1.2, 2, or 3 or 4, whatever it may be, pick one and then take the vote on it. Otherwise, I don't want to have the same this or that and in the same motion either. Yeah. It's just one and then go with it. If that fails, you can pick another one.
Right.
We can play bingo.
Yeah.
But
Okay. Well,
either way, it should be really concise.
Okay, is there someone willing to amend the original motion? Councillor Halverson.
I appreciate the clarity. Thank you. I am willing to amend that motion so that it reads option 2 is the preferred option. Kayla, if you could help us out with that.
Just interject, if we are
Awesome.
amending that, we would have to have that waiver of notice. So we would first need a motion to waive notice to amend the note.
I'm going to give you a motion to waive notice of motion.
I'm going to second that.
So it's been moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Ernst to waive the notice of motion for the 2 weeks to come back to the table to make another motion. So any questions on that motion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed. Now, do we have an amendment on the original motion? Councillor Halverson.
I'll make my motion to amend the original motion to indicate option 2 is the preferred option instead of 1 or 1.2 or whatever else.
And just for clarity, the original motion remains intact where you are now directing staff to work with the consultant to bring back development rules for option 1.2.
For option 2.
Oh, sorry, I meant 2. I really did mean.
You're trying to trick me, Kale. You're seeing if I'm paying attention. I got you.
No, it was option 2.
How much did Peter eat?
Do you want me to reread that with option 2 in it so it's
Please.
clear?
Please.
So the new motion would be that council directs staff to work with McKay Lyons Sweet Apple Architects Limited on drafting development rules based on design option 2, which is out of sight.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a seconder? It's been seconded by the deputy mayor. Okay, now is there any discussion on that motion? Councillor Mosier.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I'm just thinking that we are doing our future generations an injustice by limiting them to the potential of that hill. So by adopting the second plan, we're now limiting them from what potential could actually be done up there. And for all the other reasons I stated before, I won't go through them, but that's why I think option 1 is the right option for Blockhouse Hill.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amended motion? Councillor Halverson.
I guess I'll just reiterate my position as well that, I want to make sure that, that there's as much information and we set people up for the best we can in the future. But I do feel that option 2 financially puts less of a burden in the short and long term on the town, provides us the best revenue, the best return, the best community results, the best green space, the best view planes. I think it's the superior plan. It's what we can afford, and it will be a boon to our future generations.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'd just like to add that I'll support option 2 primarily for many of the reasons Councillor Halverson said, but also primarily because we agreed at the beginning of this that we were going to have public consultation. We were going to hear from the public, and the public clearly, the priority choice was option 2 of any. So I feel if we're going to go through all the motions and listen to the public, then we have to respect their opinions. And I know some won't be happy that we're picking this, some won't be happy that we're picking that, but this is what we heard the majority we felt could live with after the public information session. Staff seems to feel this is the right choice. And again, when you look at the cost breakdowns, I think it makes sense. So that's why I'll be supporting this amended motion.
Through the chair, just a point of clarification for the record. If you go back to the what we heard report, it did seem to find that public opinion was somewhat polarized between full scale outbuild and no development. Hence, one of the reasons that staff is recommending option 2 is because it's a balanced compromise that provides both economic benefit and many of the public resources that the public required. I simply just don't want you to go ahead with a vote feeling that option 2 was the preferred option, when in fact there was no clear preferred option.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion. All those in favor of the amended motion, raise your right hand. All those opposed, raise your right hand. Motion. Excuse me, sorry. Motion carried with Councillor Mosier voting in the negative. Okay, so now we're going to move on to 9.3.
We're not. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so based on the decision that we just made, I would also, sorry, I have notes. I would also like to move to declare the land identified in attachment A from the January 23rd, 2024 meeting surplus and no longer required for town purposes. So that would be the land based on option 2 out of sight, which we, I think Michael has the map for us here that we can bring up.
So that's been moved.
I'm sorry, can we also ask that there not be comments from the gallery, and if people can't
adhere to that they be asked to step out.
Yeah, just everybody just,
Thank you.
Yep.
Also, just a point of order, once again, should council wish to make this motion, we would require the waiver of notice.
so we need another motion to waive the notice of motion first before we go this route. So is someone prepared to make that? So moved by Councillor Mosher, or seconded by Councillor Sanford. All those in favor? We're waiving the notice of motion requirements, okay? All those in favor, raise their right hand. All those opposed? Okay, motion carried. So now, you can make your motion.
Again? Okay, I would like to move to declare the land identified in attachment A at the January 23rd, 2024 meeting as surplus and no longer required for town purposes.
It's been moved. Is there a seconder? It's been seconded by Councillor Sanford. Is there any discussion on this motion? Councillor Halverson.
Just want to reiterate, as we did the last time this came up, this is just the first step. Nothing's being sold, nothing's being disposed of with this motion. If we could just get clarity on that from staff, what this motion actually means.
Through the chair, a little bit of context. Again, on January 23rd, when the original recommendation came forward regarding declaring land surplus, staff recommended that only the lands that the corresponding development option sees as being developed be declared as surplus. The remainder of the land would not be considered surplus and then would be outside the scope of a subsequent public hearing, with the understanding that since the design option leaves that land green space, it makes sense to have the town retain that land. Hence why there were multiple maps in the January 23rd memo. Second point, a bit of information that I'll share is, yes, declaring the land surplus will trigger a public hearing. A public hearing must be held before the lands can be disposed of.
Thank you. I guess I have one comment to make on declaring it surplus at this time. Before we get the actual development rules back for option 2, i.e. parking requirements and other things of that nature, do we actually know? Because based on the report in the end of January, there were very few parking requirements attached to option 2. And I could be mistaken, but I know I myself will not support any development on that hill without any kind of significant parking requirements attached to it. So if you all of a sudden have to have on-site parking for most of that development, would that not increase the amount of land that the developer would need to go with option 2? Because obviously you're going to need to make the lots a bit bigger to be able to put cars on those properties, right? So that's why at this time, until I know exactly how much land we're talking, I wouldn't be prepared to vote in favor of putting it up for surplus land, because I don't think we really know, because based on the initial report that I saw in January, there weren't many parking requirements in any of those proposals. And I think we've learned from previous developments or earlier developments in the last couple of years that zero parking requirements just does not work in a rural urbanized center. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Through the chair, certainly each design option that was originally presented did include some on-street parking. So the provision of on-street parking could be incorporated into the development rules that are brought back based on the motion that was just passed.
Yeah, I understand. And I agree with that. I guess my question would be based on that. If you actually have to have on-site parking, then would it not increase the amount of land we have to put up for surplus for option 2 than what we were initially recommending? So I guess my question would be, do we really know what we need? Is it 8 acres? Is it 10 acres? Is it 7 acres to put up for surplus at this point?
Through the chair, none of the options as they have been currently presented and prepared by the McKay Lyons Architects team include, for example, off-site parking. So for example, there are no large-scale parking lots. That hasn't been included in any of the designs. If this is something that council wants to see, that would require some revisions to the designs. While I, of course, will defer to the CAO and clerk regarding all things procedure to not muddy the waters any further, if there is some sort of parking provisions that you would want to see in the development rules, if you have something specific in mind, you could direct staff to work with McKay Lyons on those. Otherwise, we can bring forward the development rules and then we can subsequently amend those as council sees fit. But you are correct. If we move forward with the map as presented on January 23rd, it will be solely the land that is developed in the current McKay Lyons design.
Okay, so so I won't be supporting this motion based on that because I will not support any development back there that doesn't have off-street parking. We've seen how that fell on our face in other areas of town.
Through the chair, just a point of clarification, all of the designs do include on-site parking. So off-street, right,
I'm sorry, off-street
right.
parking.
So each of the design options does include some off-street parking,
Is some on-street parking to?
a mix.
Yes, a
correct.
mix, right. Anything else at this point? Any other questions, comments? So there's a motion on the table. Do you want to read the motion again? And then we'll vote on it.
Prior to going ahead with announcing this motion, I just wanted to bring council's attention that while we have looked at the procedural policy and notice of motions are allowed, in alignment with our land divestiture policy, the determination of surplus lands should be accompanied by a report and a recommendation that's submitted for council's consideration, and the evaluation criteria would be utilized. So should council go ahead, technically procedurally, our procedural policy allows for this waiver of notice. However, it might be, depending on your interpretation of what it is, contradictory to the land divestiture policy.
So when this came before us on January 23rd at that meeting, we had, there was a motion made, but we had actually just, sorry, I'm just gonna. We deferred it, yeah. So we have seen the report, we just deferred this decision. So at the previous meeting, it was moved by Councillor Mosier, seconded by Councillor Halverson, that council defer making a decision on declaring the land identified in attachment A surplus and no longer required for town purposes, and that this decision returns for council's consideration at the March 26, 2024 meeting. That was carried unanimously. So that was already in front of us previously.
Yeah, I agree that it has been presented publicly. I just wanted to draw council to that attention that our land divestiture policy does say the report and the recommendation. So just for the perception of tonight's decisions.
Okay. I still feel okay making the motion because I do feel like it came before us previously and that we did choose to defer it. It's not brand new. We're not pulling it out of nowhere. So yeah, I would still like to move ahead.
Again, yeah, if council is comfortable making that motion, I just wanted to draw your attention to that clause in our.
Okay, so can we have the motion reread and then we'll vote on the motion?
I would ask that Councillor Duggan reread the motion.
Oh, yep, sorry.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion, raise your right hand. All those opposed, raise your right hand. Motion carried with Councilors Bertels, Deputy Mayor Ernst, and Mayor voting in the negative. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a very quick process. Now we'll move on to item 9 point. There's nothing else under that, is there? Okay. 9.3, Cultural Tourism Economic Impact Study and Plan. There's a recommendation in front of us that council approve using the $50,000 allocated to developing an economic impact study and analysis and the $137,000 received from ACOA to develop a cultural tourism economic impact study and a sustainable cultural tourism plan. That's recommendation number 1. Is someone prepared to move that? Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Moser. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Sanford.
Just give me 2 seconds here. I just need to catch up. Where are we on the agenda? Sorry. Okay, 9.3. Thank you. Okay. So the Cultural Tourism Economic Impact Study and Plan. So we're discussing the first recommendation or both?
Recommendation number 1.
Okay. So I just wanted to chat a little bit about this specifically. First of all, it's very exciting to have the opportunity to do a cultural tourism economic impact study. I have concerns based on our conversation in January 23rd around the economic impact study and analysis that we initially set out to do. And I'm thinking this goes back quite a ways, but report in January of 23 in relation to the economic impact study, it specifically was focused on the economic, social, and environmental benefits in the following sectors, specifically industry, waterfront, tourism, culture, recreation, real estate, retail, hospitality, and government. So all of those together were to help decision makers make informed decisions, because my understanding is we have no data sets from which we make decisions, which is one of the common threads that crosses in both references for study. There's no reliable data sets for Luneburg's visitation numbers or GDP. So my concern is, I'm really excited. We have money from ACOA and we can do the cultural tourism economic impact study and plan. However, I don't want to lose sight. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to lose sight of the economic impact study and analysis. So I was a little concerned because it just got one tiny little line in the new write-up. And I think that our industries and our businesses that are here in town recognize the importance that the tourism, the culture and tourism sector plays for the town of Luneburg. But again, we also can't overlook our industry and our waterfront and our government and so on. So I don't want us to lose sight. So I'm hoping that we can do both. And when we discuss this, we were hoping that there would be funds external to the town's budget. And I think we were perhaps looking maybe towards investment from the Board of Trade folks in the context of the economic impact assessment. So I'm wondering if we're still able to pursue that external funding and stay focused and true on the economic impact analysis along with the cultural impact study so that we can have both working lockstep. Perhaps we'll have a phenomenal tourism report. I can't wait. It's very exciting. But we'll also have tourism, economic, I've got too many, economic impact study and analysis as well. So we're doing 2 things at the same time. And yes, we can do that. Thank you.
So the recommendation in front of us, it was basically to proceed with the study that we've already got funding for. Does that include most of the things that Councillor Sanford has mentioned?
Through the chair, certainly Councillor Sanford has hit on a very important point, which is that no, the two do not line up perfectly. So things that may have come forward in previous staff reports as falling under the economic impact study would not be captured under this. The $50,000 was considered as part of the application as a match for the SACOA funding, but some of those pieces are seen as beyond the scope of the type of work that a COA would fund. In terms of hospitality, of course, would fall under this study. The waterfront as well, since part of our UNESCO designation in particular is our working waterfront. The waterfront and those industries could be captured under that, but it is likely that certain things will not be included under this revised direction, hence the council memo and staff seeking direction.
Okay, thank you. So we have a recommendation in front of us to proceed with the funding that we received to do this report. And I guess at that time in future, we could go on to a separate report altogether at that time. I know right now you'll see the operating budget in another week or two. You've seen it, but I mean, the public will have a chance to speak, but we don't have any other funds at this time to put into another study at this point. So this would be the study that we're doing. So down the road in the future, if we want to do another study or partner with somebody, that's something we could look at, I guess. But I know at this time, there's nothing in the budget unless I'm mistaken.
Through the chair to council, as Councillor Sanford pointed out about the lines and what says what, I don't want to lose sight of the economic impact we originally were looking for. And that was the economic impact from tourism, specifically the campground. And that's where all this spurred from. So I think what you're being asked this evening from staff is not only to pick at that and understand that a bit better, but also have some other things thrown in there. So I wouldn't suggest that we're losing anything per se, but more so getting a bit more of a comprehensive understanding of economic impact across the community. So if after that report we decided there's something else we need to pick more into, then we dig into that through the next budget process or an amended budget if we need to, which is not likely going to happen. But we do have opportunity to receive this, which would take about a year anyway, I would guess, and then comprehend it and digest it and figure out if we need more information. So I don't think we're going to lose the original thought process of what we're looking for from an economic impact assessment. If I've been clear, I guess I'm looking at Councillor Sanford. I don't think I'm answering your question. So I guess I'll leave it there. And if there's something that you need to question further, but my understanding was this came specifically from council beginning to ask questions of the economic impact of the campground. And then it kind of spurred to, okay, well, it's not just a campground. What do we do in tourism revenue? How are business affected? Things of that nature. So we have a better understanding through application processes when we put those in of what our visitations look like, what our economic impact looks like. Thank you.
Through the chair to CAO Doyle. I'm referring the memo to council from Devon Casero on January 9th, 2023. And again, we were really, in that particular report, in that memo, we were really focused on the economic impact study. And again, looking at all of those sectors. So when I talk about industry and waterfront and so on, and we're talking about, let's just say ABCO, let's say Stelia, what about Harborview Haven, who, we're trying to support and so on. Those folks are economic drivers in the town of Luneburg and bring light to certain economic factors that influence and impact the town in a big way. So it's important to understand those aspects and elements as well. So the $50,000 that was dedicated from our budget was intended to leverage some interest. My understanding was from the broader community and investment from the broader community, not government funding from a COA. I'm not talking about that. That's kind of like something that's come to us, which is great. Really glad it did. And the focus of it absolutely is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying it shouldn't be an either or. We should be able to do both collaboratively. And I suspect it would bring us an extremely informative plan specific to tourism. However, I think it would come at a cost to the other sectors that play a vital role in the town of Luneburg in an economic impact study. So I'm suggesting, can we still look to the community to match funding for that $50,000 that we had budgeted for our economic impact study? And also support the ACOA funding with the what was it, 127,000 or something like that, 137, don't have the numbers in front of me, but continue to do that. My caution, or what I'm hoping for, is that we don't make a choice between one or the other, that we continue on with the plan that we initially had, and also support the ACOA initiative as well.
I think unfortunately, if I'm right here, I think we sort of, the 50,000 we already have committed to this project, if I'm not mistaken. And that was part of the application we made, if am I not mistaken, Lori?
Through the chair, two things, if I may, to follow up on CAO Doyle's point. Certainly, this revision, certainly, again, it will capture a great deal of what's happening in the community. For example, visitor numbers, housing is on the list. And again, waterfronts, that includes all forms of waterfront activity. I just want to stress that. Council had previously amended the motion regarding the economic impact study to waive the requirement that staff seek matching funding to apply for grants to make this study feasible. So council did amend that motion. Staff was directed to seek matching funds to the $50,000 that had been allocated. We're happy to share that, again, we were successful in receiving $137,000. So surpassing our 50, a match, a 50% match. And thus staff is now returning to council with an update on that funding, what it would cover, and the scope of the project. So certainly to go back to the community again now, I would again defer to Kayla and CAO Doyle, but would likely require again some sort of increased staff direction to re-engage in that process with community members.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford.
Through the chair, with regards to the amendment for the $50,000, I understood from the minutes of the meeting that we sought to amend. We had required $10,000 from each of 5 partners is what we were looking at, separate partners. And I thought the amendment dropped that requirement, that it could come from any source, not having to be 5 individual community partners. That was what I understood the amendment to be. I could be.
That's why we have the ACOA funding. We replied through ACOA funding at that point, or one of our partners, and that's where they got the funding from. So I guess I understood all we're doing here tonight was we're supposed to be just approving the money that we received from ACOA and proceeding with the project, but maybe I'm mistaken, because I think we've discussed all this, and I thought we directed staff to look for funding through agencies like ACOA and other partners, and we were fortunate enough to get this funding. So maybe I'm mistaken.
Again, through the chair, I don't have the minutes in front of me, but my understanding is that that provision was dropped from the motion. So the amended motion does not include any direction to staff to seek funding from local community groups. It simply said directed staff to seek matching funds. But again, I defer as always to the clerk.
Yes, that's correct. So for clarity, I can read the amended motion from our January 23rd meeting of this year. So the amended motion that was passed was that council approved the development of an economic impact study / analysis, and that council approve including $50,000 in the 2023-24 draft operating budget for the economic impact study / analysis, and that the study not proceed until at least $50,000 worth of matching funds are provided by non-town sources.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think what happened was we talked about it even in our, like the mayor CAO meetings that we have once in a while as well. And we wanted to proceed with this and we felt if we kept waiting and hoping for matching funds from the community, we might be waiting forever. So let's just apply through other sources and see if we can get some funding and get this off the ground. So I think that's what we decided to do in January. So I'm very happy to see that ACOA was willing to partner with us on this. Councillor Halverson.
Yeah, just want to point out to Councillor Sanford's, I want to read the background notes here too. It does look like the study and the plan, it will encompass historic sites, museums, events, broader tourism economy, including accommodations, camping, restaurants, marine activities such as shipbuilding, fishing, and recreational boating. So, I mean, that it does capture some of the industry, and I think it's a good. It's $50,000 investment on our side to get 137 from from the province and feds to get a much needed study is good value for money right there. So. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a recommendation in front of us. Is there someone willing to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded. Councillor Mosier. All those in favor of the recommendation? Aye. Contrary minded. Okay, so now there's recommendation number 2. The council directs staff to develop terms of reference for a cultural tourism working group toward completing a cultural tourism economic impact study and sustainable cultural tourism plan. That's a lot to say. So that's a recommendation. Is someone prepared to move that? So moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any discussion? Councillor Halverson.
Just curious, once those terms of reference are created, those will come back to council and we can have a look at those to ensure that Councillor Sanford's concerns are captured as best as possible.
Yes, that comes back to us first.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed. Okay, so now no new business. So notices of motions, there's one recommendation in front of us, so we'll get that on that first. The recommendation is that council direct staff to prepare a comprehensive report on the town's responsibilities and options concerning short-term housing, and that this report addresses potential taxing and zoning options and an evaluation of both the positive and negative impacts of short-term housing within the town of Luneburg. That is a recommendation. Is someone prepared to move that recommendation? Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Any discussion on that recommendation? Councillor Halverson.
Just a question through the CAO, I guess. Any thoughts on how long it would take to prepare this report? It seems like it's going to be pretty comprehensive.
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, I'd love to give you a date, but I don't until we actually start to look into it. I think it'd be fairly simple to call around our colleagues and see what they're doing. But I think to prepare that information, we'd need at least a few meetings to bring that back. So perhaps we could provide an information update when we're able, but I wouldn't suggest it's within the next month.
Just wanted to manage expectations. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other question or discussion on that notice recommendation? Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed. Okay, so now we're going to start. I'll start in the far left. We'll go around the room. This is where councillors have a chance to bring a notice of motion forward or whatever else they might want to bring forward. So we'll start with Councillor Halverson. Councillor Mosier. Councillor Duggan. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I do have one. Here in this building, down in the downstairs hallway, we have a small number of artifacts related to the Flower Class Corvette HMCS Luneburg, which built in 1941 was very largely involved in several theaters of the Second World War, most notably the Battle of the Atlantic and D-Day. Those artifacts do a wonderful job here, but I think they could be better suited, and I would like to see I'd like to propose that those items be donated to our local branch of the branch 23, the Brigadier General Hellstrom branch 23 of our local Legion. And I'd like to see it happen relatively soon because the 5th of May next month, as is the first Sunday of every May, will be the Sunday of the Battle of the Atlantic recognition. And I think most notably, the bell from the Lunenburg would be a very appropriate item for them to use. It's a joint venture between the Legion and the Sea Cadets, and I think it would be something of great importance for their purposes and better suited that the ownership goes to them. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's going to be a notice of motion. Everyone okay with a notice of motion going back to staff to come back with a report? Councilman. Yeah.
I'd be willing to waive notice of motion just to expedite this, that it's in their hands quicker.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded to waive notice of motion. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Okay, then I need a motion to do what, Deputy Mayor?
Would you like me to?
Sure.
Okay, I move that the artifacts belonging to the town of Lunenburg related to the vessel HMCS Lunenburg be transferred to the Royal Canadian Legion Brigadier General Sheila House Branch 23.
It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Mosier. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion carried. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Is that everything? Okay, Councillor Sanford.
I have a couple of things, please. The first one I'm really excited about, it's the Federal Infrastructure Fund. So I wanted to talk for a few minutes about that, and then I have notice of motion. Some of you may recall that this past week, I think it was, that CBC News, they were covering that the announcement for the federal government pledging $6 billion for housing and new infrastructure fund. So I'm quoting, the money will be dedicated to the construction and upgrading of water, wastewater, stormwater, my favorites, right? And solid waste infrastructure, something cities have said is critical to building more housing. Of the $6 billion in the fund, $1 billion will go directly to municipalities for urgent infrastructure needs. And then they talked about shovel-ready projects. And if memory serves me correctly, I think we are just about shovel-ready with regards to the study that we've been undertaking with the separation of our stormwater, wastewater lines that Tyson, and I know he won't be back till the 18th, I think you said, Jamie.
I believe the 19th. he's back.
19th, okay. So I'm really anxious for Tyson to come back. Because what I would like to propose in a notice of motion is that council direct staff to make application to the Federal Infrastructure Fund for funding to action the next phase of the stormwater wastewater separation.
Thank you. So it's a notice of motion. To go to the next phase. Everybody good with that? Second? Yeah. We don't need to vote on the notice of motion. Yeah, so that's,
Yeah.
everyone's good with that though. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Sanford. Everyone understands that, and I think it's a great announcement. And I think this is something that has been long overdue. So hopefully we can get some funding. So that's to put it lightly. So anything else?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And just before I do go on to the next thing in regards to the funding for it, I hope they go big or stay home with their ask. Just saying, we are ready. So following up with the presentations that we had last council meeting with regards to ABCO and the Huskelson brothers that made the presentation.
Can I just stop you there for a second?
Yes.
If it's going to be about ABCO, I should probably go back there and sit, and Deputy Mayor can chair the meeting, just to make clarity. Okay.
It is for a notice of motion.
But I still
It
shouldn't
will
prob-
be in the context of ABCO, so.
I'll
Yeah.
Okay, well then go ahead.
I'm
Yeah, I
just
just wanted to
making-
make sure everybody was clear.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So having followed up and had some deeper discussions and conversation and I think a better understanding, I would like to make notice of motion for the following 4 pieces. Number 1 is to make application to the NSUARB to amend Regulation 5.14 to include energy storage in addition to renewable low-impact generators. I may not have the wording of this quite correctly, but at least you'll get a sense of the intent of what it is that I'm intending for the notice of motion. Number 2 is update 5.14B1 by adding energy storage as an option as defined in the Electricity Act of Nova Scotia, Section 2(1)AA. Number 3, work collaboratively with ABCO to engage a third-party consultant to develop the required documentation to serve as application to the NSARB. Do I have that right? UARB, right? Based on 1 and 2 that I just mentioned, as stated at ABCO's expense. So that would be hiring a third-party consultant to prepare the application to the NSUARB for what we were proposing potentially in 1 and 2. And then the final piece would be to support the submission to be executed. So those would be the 4 notice of motions that I would like to bring forward to the next council meeting for council to discuss.
Okay, so we have 4 notice of motions. First, I'll ask council if they have any questions or comments. Well, I'll go send the staff then, make sure they understand the notice of motion. So
Through the chair to Councillor Sanford, I'm hopeful you can send that to the clerk for our record. I don't think we got it all, because there's going to be some specific clarity on verbiage and understanding that we're going to need to move forward. And at first blush of just hearing this, there could be some inappropriateness where we're trying to permit a for-profit company providing funds to a municipal organization to move something forward on their behalf, if you know what I mean. We have to be careful not to cross some of those lines, but if you can provide that motion in writing to Kayla, then it gives us a better opportunity to bring something back at the next meeting that's with some details if we've noticed something from a legal perspective.
Definitely. And just for clarification, the intention was when we discussed as council following their presentations, staff had indicated that we don't have the capacity and staff doesn't have the time, so we don't have the resources. So in the context of trying to find a solution, the offer was made, could we hire a third party to be able to pull the application together so that it didn't fall on staff as a support in the context of capacity and resources. So just for clarification, that was the context in which that piece was offered.
Thank you. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. So what would be doing is seeking legal opinion for that. I don't think it would be appropriate for ABCO to give the town money to then go hire a consultant to do work that they're going to benefit from. So that's where I need to figure that out. So if you could send that, that'll gives us an opportunity to look into that and provide some advice as we bring the motion back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you very much. You'll just email that stuff to Kayla. Okay. Great. Is there anything else, Councillor Sanford? Okay, Councillor Bertels. Okay, thank you. So seeing no other notice of motions or anything, we're going to move on to number 12, which there isn't anything. So right now we're going to take a recess and make a motion to move in camera.